After 250 million euros in squad reshuffling, it's time for Milan to kick off the season. The opening match in the Coppa Italia against Bari. The starting formation, a 3-5-2, with the two wingers in Rafael Leão and Christian Pulisic playing significantly narrower, almost as two strikers up front. What's the reason for this formation? What is Max Allegri's plan for this match? That's what we're going to discuss in today's video. Now, the surprising part about this game is that there's not going to be a Max Allegri on the sidelines. Milan is going to kick off their first match of the season without their newly appointed coach on the bench. You see, in what turned out to be his final match for Juventus, Max Allegri was a Coppa Italia final against Atalanta. It ended up in Max picking up yet another trophy, but in the process, he was red carded. This happened for dissent, and you know, that video of him tearing off his jacket, his tie, completely losing it went viral. So after leaving with a bang from Juventus, that suspension carried forward to his time with Milan, and now for the match against Bari, he's not going to be on the bench anymore. But in spite of not being on the sidelines, you can be rest assured that he's leaving his mark on this match by completely revolutionizing the way that Milan has sort of, played certain players in the formation that they've played in over the past few seasons. After testing out the 4-3-3, the 3-5-2 during the preseason, this is the formation that Allegri has reportedly opted for. Now we're going to go into a structured breakdown of the 3-5-2 itself, what the responsibilities of the defenders, the midfielders, and the attack up front are going to be. But let's just initially discuss, why is this a formation that he's actually opted for? The number one reason you could say is defensive reinforcement and the fitness of the squad. So you see some of the adjustments that Milan has made into their squad this time around is the sale of Leão, a player that had, quite often found himself on the periphery, not quite starting and playing as much, not always sitting on the bench either. Milan has made that squad change. They have moved on from Leão. They have brought in the Winter. They've moved on from Theo Hernandez. They've brought in Estupiñán. And Emerson Royal is also gone with the arrival of Zachary Etekame. So some of these defensive squad changes that Milan has made, it sort of epitomizes and explains to you the importance to Max about how the defense should actually be functioning. The 3-5-2, this, allows him to deploy three center backs naturally, providing stability, especially useful after Milan's inconsistent defensive performance from last season. With the surplus of midfielders, three that Milan has signed in this transfer window, and some versatile players who can fill in that wing back role, this formation kind of maximizes the current roster that is available. No makeshift pieces, at least not in the defense and in the midfield. Everybody sort of is playing where they should be playing. Number two is more of a pragmatic approach to an you could say quote unquote easy fixture. Now, Bari being a team that plays in Serie B, last season I believe they finished in 9th place. This is a team that Milan should very easily see off. But the important piece to keep in mind in this is that Allegri still prioritizes the result over fantastical play, over flair, and over goals. He's focused on playing the right way, his way, with the right outcome. Even in a winnable game, the 3-5-2 offers that compactness to neutralize any potential counterattacks. This formation allows Milan to control the game at the San Siro without overexposing themselves defensively. Some reports suggest that Allegri sees this match as an avenue to build some early season confidence and avoid any crazy shocking outcomes, which once again emphasizes that results-oriented style that he has, even from his days at Juventus. It's not that, we're playing Bari, it's a Serie B side, let's just load up the attackers, let's just get, 4 or 5 goals. No, it's still that we're gonna play in the formation that I want to stick to ideally probably for the entire season, and we're gonna play in this way to learn, to improve for the rest of the season, instead of trying to maximize on this one game and, try to make it into a statement win. And I think a mindset like that probably breeds that stability that Allegri was even brought on for. He wasn't brought on to become a Premier League team that is outright scoring goals with high tempo. He was brought on so this team consistently throughout the season can provide results. Then there is the midfield dominance and attacking flexibility. Now, Milan has invested heavily into the midfield, and that 3-5-2, it allows for that overload in that central area of the midfield itself. That overload in the middle with Milan's quality midfielders, it could overwhelm Bari's more likely mid-block setup that they're going to come with into this game. This will also align with, Allegri's insistence on tactical adaptability. So at 3-5-2, when they're defending, we'll switch into a 5-3-2. It is more of a shock formation, you could say, that Allegri is going with compared to what we have seen Milan play over the last 3-4 seasons. And number 4 is quite as simple as Allegri's tactical identity. This is the identity. The 3-5-2 formation is what he has readily used during his time at Juventus. For him, this is the formation that balances attack and defense a lot better, and this is what got him results during his Juventus days. And this instills more of that discipline early on in the season. Prioritizing that clean sheet and a controlled win to sort of set the tempo for the season. And some fans have been concerned about this. Some fans have talked about the fact that it's going to be a long, drawn-out defensive season for Milan. Now, looking at the formation in itself, the 3-5-2 is a versatile system that sort of emphasizes on midfield control and on defensive resilience, fluidly switching between attack and defense. For Milan versus Bari, the predicted lineup is, Mike Maignan in goal. You have a 3-man back line of Fikayo Tomori, Matteo Gabbia, and Strahinja Pavlovic. Your 3 midfielders in the middle are going to be Loftus-Cheek, Ricci, and Fofana, and your wingers out wide is going to be Alexis Salamakers, who I'm thrilled that he's coming back to this Milan team. And on the left, it's going to be Pervis Estupiñán. Now, looking at the defensive line, the 3 center backs, Fikayo Tomori on the right, Matteo Gabbia in the middle, and Strahinja Pavlovic on the left. Their key duty, I guess you could say, would be to provide a solid base to absorb Bari's attacks at the end of the day, with the wide center backs in Tomori and Pavlovic stepping out more into the midfield, or even covering the flanks while the wing backs are essentially pushing forward. Gabbia, I think, will act more as the anchor in the back line. He'll be more of the organizer. He'll sweep up those loose balls that come to him. Why the 3 center backs fit for Milan? I think the key is as to how Milan's season defensively have been in the past couple years. Their defense has been leaky, and 3 center backs essentially add layers that will allow Mike Maignan to play higher and initiate build-ups. What could be some of the issues? I think the number one issue that Allegri probably has to solve in this backline will arguably have to be the defensive positioning on these players. We saw last season Tomori was sometimes just, on an island. He found himself completely outside the defensive line. He'd be in a whole other position, and I think that element for Allegri is going to be very important to manage. And I think that element will also be very important for Gabbia to manage, to be able to, shout out at his troops, communicate, make sure they look 360 degrees when a counterattack is maybe starting against them. They have to keep their eyes and ears really open. So that defensive positioning could be one of the issues, but a 3-man backline with these 3 players should be fairly solid against a side like Bari. Then there's the midfield with 5 players. Let's look at the wing backs first, in Alexis Salamakers and Pervis Estupiñán. For seasons now, if you've been following my channel for a few years, before Alexis even left this team, for the longest period of time, Benacer was my number 1, my favorite player on the squad, and Salamakers was my number 2. I always felt like this guy had such a high work rate. I just never felt like he took that next step. And then eventually Milan, moved him away to Bologna. They moved him away to Roma. Now he's come back. He's come back with more experience, and now some reports are suggesting that Max actually potentially wants to give him a contract renewal, not just hold on to the player. He's not for sale at this point in time, and the club might consider a renewal for the player. So that is a full circle story that feels really good, and hopefully he can have a solid season. In a 3-5-2, everybody knows those wing backs, they are really the engine of the formation. They are the ones who are supposed to bomb forward, cross the balls in for the strikers. They are the ones who are supposed to provide width, stretch out the defenses, then again launch those crosses in when you've already stretched out the defense and got them out of place. And naturally, in a Max Allegri system, the ability to track back, to have the stamina to run back and then track back defensively. You could say that Alexis's energy, his work rate, and Estupiñán's pace, they suit those quick transitions on both sides. When Milan is transitioning into an attack, those guys can bomb forward. when Bari might, get control of possession and start the counterattack, those guys can run back and help out. Then there's the three midfielders in Ruben Loftus-Cheek, who'll probably play the more box-to-box role, Samuel Ricci, who'll probably play the more deep-lying playmaker role, you would assume, and then there's Youssouf Fofana, who will also very likely play a more box-to-box role, maybe with a little bit more emphasis on the defense as well. And that's where I said their role will probably be overloading that midfield. Overload the central part of the field to get that possession dominance, because there's a very good chance that Bari is going to be playing that, that mid-block against Milan, and Milan has to make sure that with those extra bodies, they can sort of dominate that space where a lot of possession could be hanging. Ricci would be likely tasked with, standing in front of the defense and distributing the ball, while Loftus-Cheek and Fofana will probably help out, maybe even in some attacking manners, making those late runs into the box, linking up with the forwards. I do think Fofana will maintain a little bit more of a defensive presence, and there's a chance that Loftus-Cheek would have a lot more freedom to go back and forth. But that numerical edge, at least what is being predicted right now, with 5 midfielders for Milan and 4 midfielders for Bari in their midfield, that numerical edge could help dictate the tempo for the Rossoneri. And as I said, that tactical flexibility of, in a defensive situation, switching to a 5-3-2. It's a 3-5-2, but in a defensive situation, the 2 wing backs will drop back and create a 5-man back line. That defensive line could limit the options of what Bari can do and essentially frustrate the opposition. The concerns for a system like that, I think naturally for any time that you're playing in a 3-5-2, the concern always becomes the positioning of the wing backs. If they're slow in getting back, you leave holes open on the flanks. We sort of saw that happen last season, even in a 4-man back line with Theo Hernandez. We saw that happen so many times. He would commit forward, he wouldn't track back in time, and Milan would have a hole on their left flank. Even quite frankly with Emerson Royal, so many times he would go further up, wouldn't come back in time, and so many attacks were coming from Milan's wings. And obviously there's the element of adaptability for a player like Estupiñán. Even Alexis has played for Milan before, but he's coming back into a slightly different system, and Estupiñán is a whole new player. And the concerns even in the middle would be somewhat similar. A new player like Samuel Ricci, we'd have to see, he impressed quite a bit in during the preseason, but we'd have to see how he plays in a proper competitive game. If Bari's midfielders are physically imposing, Samuel Ricci is not necessarily the biggest player. And then naturally, we have seen the inconsistency that Ruben Loftus-Cheek at times has brought about. But really, in a match against a side like Bari who plays in Serie B, it really shouldn't matter. These 3 midfielders should be able to get the job done without having to have the new signings in Luka Modric and Arden Ishar even have to step onto the field. But I think that synergy, you pretty much have 1 player last season who played consistently and 4 players, 3 of whom were not even on your team, and 1 guy who wasn't playing a lot. So that cohesion in the midfield has to be there for Milan to be able to get the right result. Which brings us to the forwards, the 2 strikers up front. Somehow the 2 strikers are going to be Rafael Leão and Christian Pulisic. You expect Pulisic to likely be the second striker and Leão to potentially be that focal point up top. We're so used to seeing these guys play significantly more on the wings. You also must say that they have gotten their best football while playing on the wings, but now they're going to play a lot more narrow, a lot more in the middle. So they're going to have to be, we're talking about cohesion in the midfield. These 2 guys up top are going to have to be extremely cohesive. They're going to be feeding off of each other because they can totally interchange their roles. Sometimes it can be Leão who plays as a second striker and Pulisic becomes a focal point up top. This kind of, switch of play will confuse Bari's defenders and could open up opportunities for Milan in attack. But the one thing that we do know in the past, maybe 3 seasons ago when Leão was forced to play in the number 9 role, he really couldn't finish as well as you wanted him to. And over time, over the last couple seasons, we have noticed that Leão, incredible at offering his teammates assists, but not necessarily always the most consistently best finisher. He can score some screamers. He can score some excellent goals, but he's not always the most consistent as a reliable number 9 up top. And obviously, we know that it's the exact same thing with Christian Pulisic. He's played as a right winger. He sometimes fits as a left winger. He can play as a central attacking midfielder, but playing as a striker almost up top at certain points in the game, that's going to be a fairly new role for him to play as well with Milan. There were a lot of reports that suggested that Allegri believes that he can truly unlock Leao's, final step. He can truly take him to a whole new level. And there's a possibility that the coach feels he can do that by making him into a much better finisher. The more goals that Leão scores at the end of the day, the more confident it's going to make him to even be able to dribble past players, even on the wing, if he's not playing right in front of goal. Goals and assists just bring about a different type of confidence in a player, and I think that is what Allegri is trying to unlock here. So in summary, the tactical characteristics would be the attacking play, where there's width that is offered from the wing backs. It stretches out Bari's defense, creates central spaces for the midfield runners, quick counterattacks for Rafael Leão, who can use, leverage his speed and cross those balls in for a decent finisher in Christian Pulisic. We saw how many goals he scored over the last couple of seasons, so he can finish his chances. You'd probably expect Milan to hold somewhere between a 60 to 70% possession hold and try to mostly dictate the game and patiently building up from the back. The second characteristic would be the defensive play. The 3-5-2 essentially shifts to a compact 5-3-2 mid-block to limit Bari's transitions. Those vulnerabilities on Milan's flanks, if those wing backs get caught out of position, the three-man backline should be able to offer a little bit more cover in a situation like that. If Milan do press, you'd expect to be a little bit more selective pressing style. It's probably going to be the midfielders who are gonna press to force those turnovers. Build up would be another characteristic. A center back like Strahina Pavlovic, a ball carrying center back like him, could initiate the build up play from the back. Alongside the Regista and Samuel Ricci. And if Bari does opt to play, a little bit more of that low block, then Milan can go directly to a player like Rafael Leão, or even use those wing backs in Estupiñán and Salamakers for the switch of plays. So the strengths against Bari: central overload dominates midfield battles. Those 5 midfielders of Milan against the 4 midfielders of Bari. Then there's a defensive solidity that will ensure a low-risk win. Having a 3-man backline should give a little bit more coverage against those counterattacks. Then versatile attackers like Leão, Pulisic, they should be exploiting spaces against a lower division team in Bari. Some of the potential weaknesses, one, as I already talked about, could be the flank exposure if Bari targets those wingbacks. If Alexis and Estupiñán have committed forward, they leave holes in the back, that can be exploited. Then the high stamina demands on the midfield. The reason why at times Alexis and Estupiñán could get caught up top and not help out a run back for defense is because they might get tired from all that running back and forth. Then there could potentially be a little bit less width in attack if the strikers up top don't drift effectively. And I think the main reason why something like that could happen is the fact that these guys actually don't play that role. They don't play that narrow, so I guess you would assume that they would be able to drift wide pretty much because that's what they're used to doing. But that role for Leão and Pulisic has to be defined very clearly by the coach. So my prediction for this match, and I also want you guys to do this, I think for the entirety of this season, in a match preview, I'm going to give my prediction, and I want to see your prediction in the comment section. For this game, I think, even though I'm saying that it's going to be a short muzzle philosophy of Allegri, I do think a 2-0, maybe a 3-0 is a possibility. The scoreline that I'm going to go with, I think, is going to be a 2-0 for Milan. Make sure you let me know in the comment section what your score prediction is. If you like tactical breakdown videos like this, once again, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter at FootballKush. The season is back on. Let's move on from the disaster that was last season. Support this team. Still hold them to account, but do support these guys. Because always from my side, Forza Milan. Grazie mille. Ciao tutti. His style of play and the scandals. Oh, the scandals, including a bizarre locker room incident where a player essentially drugged his own teammates. And we'll look at how lowering Serie A from 20 teams to 18 teams might be the